You step inside, but the records have already been erased. The door opens on iron hinges, and the air does not move. Dust gathers in perfect stillness across the stone sill. No draft, no disturbance, no breath. This is not just a chamber. It is a sealed sentence. The girl within lies on a carved oak bed, covered in white linen that has not creased in weeks. Her name, when it was spoken, was Agnès de Villereuse. But that name, like the warmth in her limbs, has long since disappeared from this room. They say she has been sleeping for 137 days. But what they do not say, what they cannot explain, is why her chamber was bricked from the inside. There are no attendants, no nurses, only a single crucifix nailed into the far wall, and a small iron candelabrum with no candle. The chamber was designed for stillness. Not preservation, not death, just stasis, as if someone meant to pause time itself. The family claimed she was touched by God, that her silence began after a dream of fire, a vision of Saint Cecilia appearing beside her bed, hand outstretched, eyes closed. Agnès had screamed once, and then never again. But you don't find any mention of Cecilia in the record. What you do find, buried in the court documents of Troyes, is a writ of inheritance signed by her elder brother Etienne 3 days after her silence began. It states clearly, "My sister's passage into divine sleep, witnessed by clerics and household men, confirms her withdrawal from all earthly concern." And just beneath that, in a different hand, faint but legible, "She will not wake." We are sure. It is not dated. It is not signed. And it is not written in French. The body does not decay. That is what disturbs the midwives most. In 14th century France, they have seen plague death. They have buried hundreds. They know what stillness smells like. This is different. Her skin remains warm. Moisture does not leave her lips. Her lashes have not fallen. She is not comatose, not in the medical sense, for medicine in this century has no such word. Instead, they speak of silent passions, of suffocation of the womb, of feminine ecstasy in divine withdrawal. One friar calls it mulier dormiens, the sleeping woman. Another, less delicately, calls it possession. But possession of what? There is something strange about the room itself. Not the shape. It is a modest cube, 10 feet across, with a shallow arch in place of a ceiling. What is strange is the absence of anything that reflects time. No candle, no sandglass, no window to measure the sun. She is encased in an unclocked space, a sealed pocket of history, but not forgotten. No, not forgotten. Because every 3 days, a clerk in the service of the House of Villereuse enters the estate's accounting hall and signs off on a transaction titled only Sanctum Vigilance. Watching the saint. Who, exactly, is doing the watching remains unclear. There are only 2 surviving letters that describe Agnes's condition in her own era. One is from a Benedictine sister at a nearby abbey, sent to her superior with a warning. The girl has not moved, but the birds will not sing near her window, and the cat has not returned since the day she fell. The other is from a traveling Dominican inquisitor, dated July 1379. Her soul is not in the room, but her body is, and it waits. What it waits for, that he does not say. The church does not intervene, not directly, but they send a scholar, not a bishop, not a healer. A notary. Brother Jean Dumas arrives under cover of dusk. He remains in the chamber alone for 3 nights. When he leaves, he takes only one item, the family's copy of the Speculum Virginum, a devotional text for nuns. Not rare, not forbidden, but when examined in modern times, that copy, now housed in a sealed collection in Lyon, contains a marginal annotation in blood-red ink. It is not in Latin. It is not in French. It is in Glagolitic, the oldest known Slavic alphabet, and it appears only once on the page that describes spiritual torpor. The phrase, when translated, reads, "She saw the first dream, the one before sleep." There are theories. Some historians believe Agnès was in a trance state induced by fasting, a known religious rite for women resisting arranged marriage. Others suggest ergot poisoning, the hallucinogenic mold found in rye, which has been linked to medieval delirium. A few link her to the Beguine movement, lay religious women who often practiced extreme forms of mysticism and bodily denial. But none of them explain the bricking. None of them explain the letters. And none of them explain why, after 137 days, the door was never reopened. Not officially. The last note in the Villereuse household ledger reads, "Room sealed, August 2nd, 1379. No further entries permitted. No cause of death is recorded. No mass is held. The girl who slept simply disappears." But there's something else. In the Cathedral of Saint-Pierre in Beauvais, behind the apse, there is a reliquary, unmarked, undisturbed. It contains no saint's bones, no finger of the apostle, only a folded length of white linen. When studied under filtered light in 1983, scholars at the École des Chartes discovered something embedded in the fibers, a faint impression of skin. Lips pressed into fabric, as if someone had tried to speak, without sound. There is no proof this was Agnès, but the fabric dates to the exact year, and the reliquary was installed in secret. Agnès de Villereuse is not the only one. By the century's end, similar cases appear in Lorraine, in Bern, in Le Mans. Always noble daughters. Always silence. Always sleep without decay. The physicians stop writing them down. The priests begin to call them miracles. But the women? They never speak for themselves. Not yet. You are standing before an altar, but the saint beneath it is not dead. The candles flicker with a wind that cannot be traced. No window is open. No breath disturbs the chill. You are in St. Truiden, in what remains of a minor Belgian chapel. The stone is grooved by centuries of prayer, but the name you are here to find does not appear in the stained glass or marble. She is not remembered by inscription. She is remembered by impossibility. Christina Mirabilis. Christina the Astonishing. The woman who died, rose into the rafters of a cathedral, and then slept, on and off, for years at a time, neither living nor lifeless. But this is not hagiography. This is pattern. She was born in 1150, a peasant girl, the seventh child of a field worker. Her life is never meant to extend beyond dirt and silence. But at 21, she collapses. Her family weeps. The funeral begins. A priest chants over her body, and then she rises. Not metaphorically, not spiritually. She stands, eyes wide and unfocused, and levitates to the beams of the church, where she clings, screaming of purgatory. Some call it divine madness. Some, the stigmata of resurrection. But then she begins to vanish. For days, then weeks, and then years. She is found sleeping in caves, in trees, in open graves. Her body stiff as marble. Her pulse faint but present. Always returned, always unchanged. In 1196, the chronicler Thomas de Cantimper writes, "She passed among us like one knot of flesh. And when she returned from the tomb, her voice was not her own." What disturbs the scholars is not her levitation, or her return from death. Medieval Christianity was swollen with such stories. What disturbs them is the rhythm. Christina sleeps for exactly 40 days, then 3 months, then a year. Each time she emerges thinner, her eyes darker, her words more distant from sense. But she does not lose mass. She does not wither as a starving woman would. A physician from Liège observes, her organs remain warm, but she is elsewhere, entirely. The monks call her a vessel. The women who come to see her do not call her anything. They sit beside her, in silence. She is not the only one they come to see. By the early 13th century, at least 7 other women are described in minor monastic records, sleeping for unnatural durations, resisting decay, producing cryptic utterances. They are not saints. Not officially. They are referred to as dormiens, the sleeping ones. The church does not canonize them, but they also do not interfere. Instead, they begin to record, not publicly, in private codices, in mirrored texts written from right to left, often and signed. At the Abbey of Marienthal, near modern-day Luxembourg, a document from 1219 reads, "The third one has entered the sleep. She neither consumes nor expels. She hears, perhaps. She listens, but she does not reply." Beneath this passage is a single drawn sigil, a half-open eye inside a circle. This symbol appears again in a Franciscan codex from Bohemia, dated 1242, and once more, carved faintly into the lintel above Christina's chapel. It is not part of any known Christian symbology. By the 14th century, Christina's name begins to appear in hidden ledgers, not as a saint, but as a precedent. In the case of Agnès de Villereuse, the legal document claiming her estate includes a marginal note. Her slumber is not unique. Recall the miracle of the astonishing. And in the Dominican Library of Ghent, an inquisitor's manual includes this phrase beneath a redacted section. They follow Christina, but they do not wake. It's not clear who they are, or why no punishments are listed. Centuries later, when Pope Benedict XIV undertakes a formal investigation into sainthood causes, he finds Christina's case difficult to contain. Too much mysticism, too little proof, and the witnesses are gone. But in a footnote, buried in his commentary on heroic virtue, he writes, "She endured the mortification of time without death. If it was not divine, it was worse." Worse, a word not chosen lightly. Because if Christina did not belong to God, then where, or to whom, did her sleep belong? There are other accounts, ones kept from ecclesiastical scrutiny. In the town of Sinaï, an apothecary's ledger from 1283 describes a woman, asleep in a barrel, submerged in oil, for healing. She does not wake. She does not rot. In Aosta, a stonemason reports finding a woman interred upright, eyes closed, with her hands in prayer and no sign of embalming. Her name is not known. Her features match descriptions of Christina. The dates do not align, unless the story is longer than it seems. In 1991, the Catholic University of Leuven runs non-invasive tests on the remains housed in Christina's reliquary. What they find is ambiguous. The bones belong to a woman in her 40s, but the carbon dating places her between 1160 and 1350, an impossible range for one person. Unless, of course, she was not always awake. Unless sleep, for her, was not a state, but a passage. Some scholars argue that Christina represents a psychosomatic fugue, a cultural form of catatonia shaped by religious obsession. Others believe she was epileptic, that her trances were seizures misunderstood by a fearful century. Still others see her as political metaphor, a peasant girl who resisted feudal control by ceasing to obey time, speech, and flesh. But all of them agree on one point. She refused to die, and something about that refusal spread. By the time her chapel was deconsecrated in the 17th century, Christina had already become a rumor again, a symbol not of holiness, but of interruption. You see her faint outline in the records of nuns who ceased motion for long seasons. You hear her name in the songs of Beguines who call for sleep as refuge. You sense her shape behind closed doors where noble daughters are put to rest, but not buried. The church never canonized her. They did not need to, because a miracle too complex to name becomes something else. It becomes an instruction. And across the centuries, women begin to follow it, not with faith, but with silence. The girl in the stone cell has not moved in 7 weeks. Her hands remain folded over her chest. Her hair has been braided and re-braided by unseen hands. Not recently, not since she lay down, but long before, perhaps by herself, in preparation. Her mouth is closed. Her feet are clean. The dust beneath her bed has settled without disruption. She is not simply asleep. She is holding her silence like a shield. This is not the silence of affliction. It is the silence of refusal. It begins to appear with more regularity in the late 1300s. Noble daughters who collapse into prolonged unconsciousness, their conditions unexplained, their surroundings strangely orderly. They are not seized. They are not fevered. They are not visited by visions of flame or sound. They simply disappear inward, one by one, in castles, in convents, in private family rooms sealed by stone or prayer. They stop responding to their names. They stop resisting the hands of their caretakers. They stop blinking when light touches the eye. And always, just before the silence, a disruption in their future, a promised marriage, a contested inheritance, a transfer of land or title. The cases mount, unrecognized as a group because they are never named the same way. In Le Puy, the girl is said to have fallen into divine rest. In Siena, consumed by the stilling angel. In Mainz, taken by Marian Hush. But the pattern is not poetic. It is precise. Documents from 14th century ecclesiastical courts show repeated interventions, not for illness, but for property. In one record dated 1381, a young woman named Beatrix de Morvan is declared unfit for inheritance due to prolonged unnatural withdrawal. The record is signed by 2 witnesses, a local priest and the woman's uncle, who promptly assumes control of her dowry lands. The text notes that Beatrix has not stirred since the feast of St. Clare. No mention of cause. No physician consulted. No priest called to administer rites. But beneath the decree, in nearly invisible ink, there is a notation. Lingua mortua, vult non dicere, a dead tongue. She does not wish to speak. Not cannot. Wishes not. By modern diagnostic standards, this would be called conversion disorder, or perhaps dissociative catatonia. But medieval Europe had no such language. They had only metaphors. The womb wandering, the spirit withdrawn, the devil silenced in her throat. But look closer. The women are not in distress. Their bodies are unmarked by violence. Their limbs are often positioned as if in prayer, not stiff, not collapsed, but composed. This is not collapse. It is choreography, and in many cases, they do not return. Or if they do, they return changed. In 1393, the records of the monastery of St. Heloise describe a sister who lay unmoving through 3 liturgical seasons. When she rose, she spoke only one phrase in Latin. I remember the hunger, but not the hunger of flesh. She died weeks later. The phrase is carved into the stone beneath her cell. You begin to see it as a kind of architecture, a hidden structure of defiance, encoded into the only thing women of their station were allowed to control: their bodies. Speech was monitored. Movement was confined. Religious ecstasy was suspect. But sleep was permitted. Sleep was safe. Sleep was invisible. And so they used it. They used sleep not to rest, but to resist. The scholar Hildegard of Bingen once wrote, "The soul may retreat deeper than the eye can follow. And when she does, she becomes her own monastery." It was not meant as instruction, but some took it as such. The noblewomen of 14th century Burgundy, for example, were often educated in cloistered households where spiritual metaphors were taught alongside obedience. But what happens when metaphor is taken literally? What happens when a girl, told she is the property of her husband-to-be, discovers a loophole that if she becomes too holy, too silent, too absent, she cannot be married at all? They called it divine sleep. They anointed her instead of burying her. But in the private letters of abbesses, something else surfaces. In 1397, a letter from Abbess Odile de Fontenay to her sister reads, "We have 3 sleepers now. The last one said nothing, only crossed herself, then laid down on the chapel stones and did not rise." And then, almost as an afterthought, "They are not ill. They are watching us." There are hints that this sleep spread as an idea, not as a contagion, but as a code. In southern convents, psalters are found annotated with small, repeated symbols, 3 closed eyes drawn beside verses on obedience and surrender. In one case, the symbol appears beside the verse. "I laid me down and slept. I awaked, for the Lord sustained me." Psalm 3 verse 5. In another, beside, "My soul is even as a weaned child." Psalm 131 verse 2. But the annotations do not appear in the hand of clerics. They are delicate, careful, likely feminine. Someone was mapping something inside the margins. It is not only girls. In Avignon, a woman known only as Marguerite la Muette is described as having entered the quiet for 9 months. She was neither noble nor cloistered. She was a servant. Yet when she woke, she was able to recite entire passages from Scripture in Latin. No one had taught her Latin. She was dismissed as possessed, beaten, and then she entered silence again. She did not speak for the final 12 years of her life. The medical treatises of the day begin to splinter under the weight of the inexplicable. Guy de Chauliac, the father of medieval surgery, offers no comment on long-duration sleep. Nor does Avicenna, nor Constantine the African. But in one rare tract housed in the Bibliothèque Mazarine, a Parisian physician named Julien Ardent writes of a condition of volitional suspension found only in young, unmarried women of means. He concludes, "They have found a gate, but we cannot see where it leads." His name is struck from the register 2 years later. No further works are known. These women did not fall ill. They did not become holy. They did not become saints. They became undecidable. And in the system of medieval patriarchy, where a woman must be either wife, virgin, or sinner, this was not only unsettling. It was dangerous, because a girl who will not speak cannot be made to confess. A girl who will not wake cannot be made to wed. A girl who will not die cannot be buried. She can only be watched. and eventually forgotten. There are shelves that no longer open. Archives where the wood has warped with moisture, where keys have been lost, where records sleep in silence thicker than dust. You walk slowly through the medical archives of Montpellier, once the finest school of healing in medieval Europe, and the silence here is cultivated. Not accidental. Like a corridor cleared before something is hidden. Montpellier trained the physicians who tended kings, abbesses, and cardinals. Its reputation was carved in both blood and logic. And yet, beginning in 1390, its ledgers shift tone. A dozen female patients are described as exhibiting exhaustion unto stillness. No fevers, no visible wounds, no signs of plague or palsy, only silence, immobility, sleep that will not break. By 1405, this phrasing disappears entirely. No follow-ups, no outcomes, no deaths, just absence. One case, from 1393, stands out. Patient, Isabeau Dupuy, age 17, of noble line, found in state of profound withdrawal. Heart rate present, respiration slow, no vocal response, pupils dilated but reactive, limb tension absent. The report notes her mother's insistence that this was a holy calling, while her father demanded remedial bleeding. Neither intervention had any effect. She remained inert. The attending physician records something strange in the margin. I spoke to her. She did not respond, but I believe she heard. A week later, the entry ends with, condition unchanged. Third week, and then, nothing. No death notice, no discharge, no transfer of care, just a blank space where a name should be continued. Other physicians echo the pattern. A man named Renaud de Mersant documents 4 similar cases in his short treatise De Feminarum Statu Dormentium, on the state of sleeping women. The manuscript survives only in fragments. But in one section he writes, "They do not dream. I know this because I watched her eyes beneath the lids. No movement, not even once. And then later, I left her with the candle lit. Returned after midnight. The candle was out. The wax was cold, but she had not moved. Her hands were in the same position. I believe I was not alone." Renaud disappears from the university's rolls 2 years later. The official record lists plague relocation, but Montpellier saw no plague outbreak that year. So many names vanished this way. In the tax ledgers of Carcassonne, a physician known only as VS declares 10 households exempt from medical payment under the clause nulla restitutio. No restoration. In practice, this clause was used only when death was certain. But in these cases, the patients were not dead. They were listed as held in stillness. The silence here is not natural. It is structured. One of the few preserved letters from a Montpellier professor to his colleague in Padua reveals growing discomfort. They come to us not for healing, but for confirmation. They wish us to name what cannot be named. But we are not priests. We are only men of blood and bone. And then, the last girl's body did not change temperature for 5 days. We tested with mercury and flame. She was warm, but not warmer, as though heat obeyed her command. If you follow the trail outward, beyond Montpellier, into the countryside, something else begins to appear. In the village of Lodov, 1398, a girl named Avellini is brought to the Abbey Hospital. She has not spoken for 2 months. She does not blink when touched. The attending cleric writes, "Her breath is slight, like dust beneath cloth. But she is not dying. She is not moving toward anything. She is simply held." 3 days later, the abbey burns. The girl is never seen again. The cause of the fire is never determined. You might expect this to spark theological debate, a council, a treatise, a condemnation, but no such discourse appears. Instead, the silence spreads. By 1409, not a single case of sacred sleep or withdrawal by grace appears in the Montpellier medical annals. It is as if the profession agreed, tacitly, collectively, not to name it again. Not because they didn't believe it, but because they believed it too much. There is one exception. A single vellum page bound into the wrong volume, mislabeled, hidden between treatises on gout and gallstones. It contains no name, only a diagram. A female figure, lying supine, surrounded by what appear to be circles of influence, flame, water, mirror, and silence. Each symbol is annotated in Greek. The silence symbol is labeled Echo Cruci, the echo hidden. Beneath the diagram, a phrase in Latin, written sideways along the margin. She is not silent. We are deaf. This may seem poetic, but it is not metaphor. Because in a separate, unrelated manuscript, a guide to dream interpretation dated 1411, there is a footnote added decades later. Beware the women who do not move. They are not dreaming. They are remembering. And elsewhere, in a Florentine codex of disputed miracles, another annotation, and signed. Some sleepers wake with knowledge they did not have. One recited the names of herbs never taught. One named a birth that had not yet occurred. The implications are not mystical. They are political. If these women knew something, remembered something, that others did not, then sleep is not retreat. It is surveillance. It is preparation. It is preservation. And so, the physicians stop recording. Not because there is nothing left to see, but because the act of witnessing has become unsafe. Because the women are no longer objects of study. They are subjects of some deeper grammar. A grammar medicine cannot parse. A grammar faith refuses to translate. A grammar built in silence. The Church has always documented miracles with caution. Sanctioned apparitions, bleeding hosts, incorruptible corpses. All are subject to process, observation, investigation, delay. And yet, with the sleepers, the process is unclear. They are not canonized, not condemned, not even discussed. Instead, they are visited, quietly, clandestinely, often under the guise of confession or inspection or spiritual aid. But the pattern becomes visible once you know to look. In the winter of 1404, in a priory outside Tours, a girl named Jacquette de Saint-Aubin lies down during morning prayers. She does not rise. She breathes, barely. Her body does not decay. Her eyes do not open. The sisters call it a visitation. They anoint her with oil. They ring the small iron bell that signals divine silence. They wait. 3 days pass. On the 4th day, a rider arrives from Rome. He bears no crest, no declaration, only a parchment with the seal of the Sacred Congregation for Rites. He does not speak to the sisters. He does not go to the chapel. He enters her cell and remains inside for 5 hours. When he emerges, his face is pale. He leaves without a word. The next day, Jacquette's name is struck from the priory register. Not erased. Struck. A line, dark and deliberate, through her name. But just beneath it, smaller, inked in the margin. Anima videre, the soul sees. This is not an isolated case. In the archives of the Diocese of Lyon, for near-identical visitations are recorded between 1392 and 1410. Each time, the girl enters silence. Each time, a cleric arrives within 3 to 5 days. Always alone, always unannounced, always departing without action. What are they listening for? What are they told? We do not know, because the records do not name the visitors. Only the phrase appears, again and again, under the guidance of the Camera Secreta, the secret chamber. The phrase predates the modern Vatican bureaucracy, but in its shadow, something darker moves. In 1413, an anonymous treatise circulates through French monastic circles, De Dormientibus Fidei, on the sleepers of the faith. It is unsigned, bound in black leather, marked with no imprimatur, but its pages are meticulous. It describes 11 cases of extended female sleep, drawn from priories, abbeys, and noble estates. It categorizes them by duration, onset, and what the author calls residual consecrated phenomena, including incorrupt breath, spontaneous warmth, and the refusal of decay. One passage stands out. They are not saints. They are not possessed. They have not fallen. They are gates through which something ancient still peers. The text is banned within a year. Of the remaining copies, only one is known to exist, buried in the restricted codices of the Bibliotheca Apostolica Vaticana. Its location, Codex Sileni, 311d. Its access, denied. You find fragments in correspondence. A letter from a Benedictine abbot to his superior. We cannot admit her. The silence is too deep. Even the stones have begun to echo. Another, from a Franciscan inquisitor. If these girls are vessels, who is filling them? And in the private journals of a Jesuit apologist, dated 1581, the sleeper is not sleeping. She is observing a world that forgot her name. And she remembers. That entry is followed by a blank page. And then, abruptly, a different handwriting. There are whispered traditions among cloistered nuns, passed down, never written, of sleepers who rose not healed, but changed. One sister, decades after her vigil beside a girl who did not wake, described it this way. Her breath was steady, but time moved differently in the room. We heard the bell ring, but the candle never shortened. Another writes, she returned, but she was not alone. She knew things we had buried beneath stone. She asked for the red book, the one we were forbidden to read. There was no red book listed in the priory's inventory, but the cell in which the sleeper lay is still sealed. No one enters it now. The stonework has been plastered over, not for preservation, for concealment. What is the church hiding? A miracle it cannot control? A sacrament it cannot name? Or a secret it once exploited, and now fears will return? There is evidence the Vatican's early congregation for saints documented more than miracles. A 15th century ledger, misfiled among martyr reports, contains an odd heading. Feminea mobiles, non-extincti, still women, not extinct. The entries are minimal, each marked only by a place, a duration, and a single word. Watched, contained, listened, returned, vanished, and in one case, disturbingly, simply, denied. Denied what? Denial is not a category for saints. It is a verdict. Perhaps they had seen too much. Perhaps they had carried something back. Perhaps what they carried had no name in Latin. The final entry in the ledger bears no place. Only a time. Vigilius Sancti Crucis, 1421. And beside it, Ista non surrexit. Non to hack part. This one did not rise. Not from this side. There is no commentary. No context. Only the entry. And below it, once again, the mark of the secret chamber. You begin to feel it then, the subtle rearrangement of time. These women are not anomalies. They are repetitions, incantations, interruptions in a chronology written by men who feared what did not obey. Not illness, not faith, not heresy, something older, something beneath. In silence, the church codified doctrine, but it also buried divergence. And these women were not divergent. They were dangerous, not because they broke the rules, but because they refused to play the game at all. You hear it before you see it. The hush that belongs only to rooms built for reverence. Stone on air, air on stillness. This is not a chapel in the usual sense. It has no altar, no pulpit, no pews, but every line of it bends toward the center, toward a single slab, low and unadorned, on which lies no saint, no martyr, no relic. Only the suggestion of a body. They do not call her by name. They call her Dormiens Benedicta, the blessed sleeper. And around her, votive candles flicker, casting arcs of gold against the ash-colored walls. Not one has melted below the halfway mark. She is not canonized. The church does not list her among its saints. And yet, the faithful kneel. Women mostly. Some old, some barely out of girlhood. They do not speak aloud. They do not cross themselves. They sit in silence, as though waiting for something to finish watching them. This chapel is not in a city. It is buried in a forest clearing near the borders of modern Alsace, a region that has passed between nations so many times its history bleeds at the edges. The building does not appear on official maps, and yet it stands, stone against time. She is not the only one. Across Europe, a pattern begins to reappear. Unmarked chapels, oratories with no liturgy, shrines with no relics, only a bed-shaped depression in the stone. Always rural, always hard to find, and always frequented by women who leave no offerings, only silence. In one shrine near Assisi, a visitor notes that the women do not enter the chamber. They press their hands to the door and remain there, as if asking permission. Historians label them folk sites, remnants of Marian veneration, or syncretic Christianization of earlier goddess cults. But the details are too precise, too similar, too deliberate. At a chapel in Lower Saxony, the walls bear no frescoes, only faint carvings, hundreds of small, closed eyes etched into the plaster. And in a chapel in Flanders, the floor stones have been worn not by walking, but by kneeling. A single position, repeated for centuries. What, exactly, are they venerating? It is not martyrdom. There is no evidence these women suffered violence. It is not miracle. There are no reports of healings or signs. It is not intercession. No prayers are spoken. What remains is an unspoken recognition that these women entered silence and stayed, and in doing so, left something behind. Not presence, but structure. In 1472, a traveling Dominican named Brother Clemens writes of a chapel where the floor bears no altar, but a shape in stone worn deep by weeping. He is disturbed by what he finds. There is no priest, no Massachusetts, but the women say she listens still. I heard nothing, but I felt unwelcome. He never returns. This is not an isolated reaction. Other clergy report unease in such places. Some refuse to enter. In 1501, a young Jesuit novitiate is sent to examine a sleeper's chapel in the Pyrenees. His report reads, "It is colder within than without. My candle bent toward the door. I believe this place does not want to be seen." He later writes that he fell asleep for 3 days after returning and could not recall his dreams. And yet, despite discomfort, none are destroyed. That is the most unsettling part. These were centuries of inquisitions, purges, wars. And yet these chapels survive, not untouched, but unerased. Because to erase a sleeper is to draw attention to her. And attention is what they most feared. Some scholars believe the shrines were tolerated because they diverted feminine ecstasy from heretical movements. Better a sleeping woman than a speaking one. Better a hidden chapel than a congregation. But others suggest something else. That the church needed the sleepers. Not to celebrate them, but to contain them. Because whatever passed between the body and the silence, it did not end when the eyes closed. In one sealed chamber beneath a church in Galicia, a manuscript is found in the early 20th century. Bound in unmarked leather, fragile, smelling of cedar and dust. It is titled only, Expectatio, the Waiting. The text is fragmented, damaged by humidity and insects. But one phrase is clear. She sleeps, and the silence bends around her. Not because she is empty, but because we are. They were not buried. They were installed, not as corpses, as thresholds. And slowly, as the centuries passed, the idea of the sleeping saint began to form, not through official doctrine, but through inference, through fear, through proximity to something unspoken. At some point, the faithful stop asking when she will wake. They begin asking what she saw. It is not only women who visit. A few early records mention men, soldiers, mostly, who knelt at the stone beds before leaving for war. In one account from 1533, a mercenary leaves behind a scrap of parchment. I dreamed of her, eyes closed, but she looked at me. I told her I was afraid. She did not speak, but I woke holding a piece of silk I had not owned. No explanation is ever found. These are not miracles. They are instructions, written in silence, remembered through stone, and passed, hand to hand, in the dark. One modern researcher, an anthropologist working in Lorraine, notes that some of the chapels are aligned precisely with ancient burial mounds. Others with pagan wells, a few with astronomical nodes, winter solstice, lunar apex. This cannot be coincidence, because sleep, in these shrines, is not passive. It is a mechanism, not a retreat from the world, a return to something beneath it. In the chapel of Saint Helene, on the French border, the door is always open, but no one goes inside after dusk. Villagers say the candles relight themselves if extinguished, and that the bells do not ring in human time. Only when the weather shifts. Only when a woman dies. Only when someone dreams in a language they do not speak. What are these places? Not graves. Not churches. Not even memories. They are containers. Not for faith. Not for doubt. But for what must never be named in daylight. The knowledge that somewhere, beyond the veil of obedience and time, she is still listening. There is a book you are not supposed to find. Its title is plain. Its cover, unmarked. Bound in cowhide darkened with age, its pages thick with the residue of fingers long gone. It does not sit on a shelf. It lies inside a drawer, within a cabinet, behind a locked grate, inside a room with no formal cataloging. Its only title, Index Feminarum Oblatarum, the Index of Forgotten Women. It is not part of the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the official list of banned books. It is something older, colder, something no one admits they are still copying by hand. This book lists names, but not saints, not heretics, not martyrs. These are names of women who ceased to speak and remained present, of women who did not confess, did not convert, did not die. Some entries span only a few words. Others are paragraphs, fading ink, truncated margins, Latin crumbling into silence. Some entries have no names at all, just descriptions. The girl who watched the priest without blinking for 40 days. The woman who slept under glass but left no breath. The daughter who entered silence the morning after her dowry was sealed and did not age for 12 years. These are not fables. These are case records. Filed, hidden, reshelved, not to be read, only to be preserved, as if someone, somewhere, believed the forgetting must have a boundary. The first surviving copy is believed to have originated from the Council of Basel, 15th century. The council was meant to reform the church. It became instead a record of its boundaries. During the sixth session, a group of clerics debated how to handle women who displayed miraculous immobility but did not produce speech, stigmata, or acts of charity. The theologians were split. Some called for canonization procedures, others for silent burial. One voice, attributed to a cleric named Adalbert of Mainz, argued for documentation, not decision. His surviving comment: "If they do not speak, they are not for us. But someone must remember." No such official list was sanctioned. But not long after, the Index Feminarum Oblatarum appears. Not distributed, just present, in certain monasteries, certain universities, certain rooms. Its language is technical. No poetry, no praise. Only observations, heartbeat, respiration, temperature, postural rigidity. Yet now and then, something breaks through. Something that isn't medical. Something that feels more like awe. She lay as stone. But when I placed a candle by her side, it burned twice as fast. No breath, but the room misted over. My hands felt watched. She moved only once, to cover the book with her hand. Which book? Not recorded. You do not find this text in any official archive. You find it by accident, or perhaps by recursion. Because in certain archives, researchers note a strange recurrence of citations that lead nowhere, references to manuscripts that do not exist or do not correspond to their page numbers. But trace the citation pattern closely enough, and you find it forms a shape, a constellation of pages, a body, sleeping. One scholar, writing under pseudonym in the 1920s, refers to this text as the spine of the erased. She claims to have seen a copy in the catacombs beneath Naples. Her letter reads, "The pages were warm. I do not exaggerate. They steamed in the cold. I felt I had entered a tomb, not of death, but of containment." She died shortly after. Her apartment burned. The copy, if it existed, was never found. What remains most disturbing is the frequency. The index does not list a dozen names. It lists hundreds, across regions, across languages, across centuries. There is no indication they ever knew one another. And yet, the entries echo. So precisely, too precisely. One entry from Bruges. She entered silence after the death of her brother. Her tongue turned gray. Her pulse remained. She did not move until the feast of St. Lucia, 12 years later. Another from Krakow. Silent since the feast of Lucia. Cold tongue. Living breath. Did not age. Another from Girona. Lucia again. Always Lucia. Why Lucia? No commentary follows. Just a line. Faint. Almost invisible. She keeps the calendar the rest forgot. St. Lucia, the bringer of light. Patron of the blind. Her feast day aligns with the winter solstice in older calendars. She sees in darkness. She endures without sight. She is martyred for refusing a marriage she did not want. Her punishment? Silence. The pattern returns. Silence, following the threat of marriage. Silence, when knowledge is denied. Silence, when inheritance is transferred. Not sleep as illness. Sleep as record. And what is a record that cannot be burned? Not ink. Not parchment. Not tombstone. Only the body. And the silence within it. Not absence, but warning. You begin to wonder. Who copied this index? Who preserved it? Who made sure it passed through hands without ever appearing in a catalog? And then, more troubling still, why hasn't it stopped? The last confirmed entry is dated 1831, but a note follows. She has not returned. She does not breathe, but the candle cannot be extinguished. That was nearly 2 centuries ago. But in some circles, among archivists who do not speak publicly, among nuns who do not write, there is belief that new names have been added, that the index continues, not because someone remembers, but because someone is still watching. And if the index is watching, then who is it waiting for? The legal document is brittle, but legible. It names the transfer of an estate, vineyards, granaries, a small chapel, from the hand of one noble house to another. The language is formal. The terms are complete. Only one thing is missing: the death certificate. Because the woman whose land is being signed away is not dead. She is sleeping, and that makes all the difference. Her name was Isabel de Valier, daughter of a count, unwed, educated. In 1487, she entered what was then called prolonged devotional repose, a phrase used when noble women retired from public life without entering a convent. Most took vows. Some disappeared into private chapels. Isabel did neither. She simply stopped speaking, then walking, then moving. At first, she was kept in her room, soft linen, silver combs, daily prayers. Her pulse remained steady. Her skin remained warm. She was dressed, bathed, fed broth when it would pass her lips. Her eyes did not open, but her hands remained folded in a perfect posture of calm, and her breath never ceased. By the third year, her family declared her touched by grace. By the fourth, her uncle filed the first petition to assume stewardship of her lands. He was denied. By the seventh, he filed again, this time with a note from a parish priest who claimed, "She is absent in the flesh. Though her body is with us, her spirit is taken." This time, the court agreed. The land was transferred. Her dowry, unclaimed, was redirected to church tithe. She remained, in silence, in the same bed. This is not a singular case. Across France, Italy, the Low Countries, similar records begin to appear, not in royal archives, in private ones. Manuscripts that document land transfers not upon death, but upon spiritual withdrawal. Notarized, stamped, sealed with wax. As though this new category, the not dead, the still, required its own legal language. And, more troubling, its own economic one. In Venice, 1492, a woman named Lodovica del Torre enters a state of withdrawal 2 months before her marriage is to be finalized. The marriage contract dissolves. Her husband's family sues. They claim fraud. The court responds. The lady has not fled. She remains. But she is not in command of her faculties. No voice, no vow. No mention is made of illness. Instead, the contract is annulled in light of mystical contingency, a term that appears nowhere else in Venetian law. It is as if the law begins to bend, slowly, subtly, around the absence these women create. An absence that cannot be punished, because it is not rebellion. It is not refusal. It is not death. It is only stillness. A 1503 record from Ghent shows an unusual petition. A younger brother requesting transfer of his sister's inheritance on the grounds that she has been unmoved in the flesh since Candlemas. The court replies, "We cannot claim her soul, but we may relieve her of burden." Burden, as though her silence were an act of generosity or debt. In at least 6 cases, monastic scribes are brought in to witness the presence of these women before legal decisions are finalized. They are told to confirm that the body breathes, that the heart beats. They are not asked to interpret, only to record. But in the margins, they do interpret. They write things like, "The air thickened. The flame flickered when I approached. She wept, without opening her eyes." Over time, the word used to describe them shifts. Not ill, not mad, but immobilis. Not immobile, a word of physics. Immobilis, a word of will. Not stuck, but still on purpose. Some church officials begin to suspect something else. A 1517 letter from a canon in Cologne reads, "These women remain. The world moves. And yet, in their stillness, things rearrange. They do not act, but the page turns." He means it legally, but the implication is deeper, because in at least 4 families, the sleeper's silence halts marriage, prevents the merger of estates, forces the father to divide his holdings. The stillness changes not only the self, but the structure around it. These are not the acts of revolutionaries. They are not cries of freedom. They are interruptions, silent, immovable, and devastating. And still, the records remain careful. No accusations, no trials, no burnings, because to punish them would require a declaration, and a declaration would mean admitting what was happening. So the church steps back, the courts rewrite, and the families wait. In one case, they wait 41 years. Genevieve Diego Peirce entered her silence in 1478. She awoke in 1519, still breathing, still young. Her cousin, who had taken her lands, refused to relinquish them. She spoke only once. He did not hold them in trust. He held them in hunger. She died 3 days later, but the lands returned to her name. Her will, unsigned, unsealed, unsanctioned, was found tucked into the linen of her bed, witnessed by no one, yet accepted by the court, because the document was written in her hand and dated in a year no one could explain. The inheritance of silence is not property, it is structure, the architecture of refusal, and every woman who lay still inside it redrew the map, not with rebellion, but with breath, held, measured, and remembered. In the mountains of Castile, a stone building stands half buried in the rock. Its records are incomplete. Its name changes depending on which century you consult. But in a monastic ledger from 1524, it is referred to only as cella obscura, the dark cell. It is not a prison, not a tomb, not a hermitage. It is a vault, for silence, for memory, for the women who do not move. The monks here are not Benedictines, not Franciscans, not named at all. Their robes are of undyed wool. Their speech is restricted to dusk and dawn. They do not sing. They do not preach. They do not write, except once a year, during what they call Vigilia Intacta, the vigil of the untouched, when they copy, by hand, the same 3 pages into fresh parchment. Each page bears a name. Each name belongs to a woman who entered their walls, lay down, and did not rise for years, sometimes decades, sometimes ever. The first recorded sleeper arrived in 1480. She was not brought. She walked. The monks did not ask her name. They prepared the stone bed. She lay down and did not move. They say the dust never settled on her skin, that when it snowed, no frost touched her. She breathed, but did not warm the air. She remained for 17 years. And when she died, if she died, they say she left behind no body, only a single hair, coiled, unbroken. Who told them what to do? There is no founding charter, no ecclesiastical sanction, no correspondence, only fragments, mentioned obliquely in letters between more conventional monasteries. Whispers, warnings, a phrase that repeats in different tongues. When she comes, do not ask, do not speak, do not bless. Why? Because it was not the monks who protected her. It was she who protected the monks. We think of monasteries as places of prayer, but some are repositories for forbidden texts, for dangerous relics, for knowledge that cannot be erased, only buried. And some of that knowledge breathes. In the subcrypt of Cella Obscura, a structure exists unlike any other in Europe. It is not a tomb. It is not an altar. It is a box of stone, 7 feet long, 2 wide, 2 high, fitted with a single ventilation slit no wider than a feather's width. Inside, nothing. No markings, no script, but the air is always warm, and every monk who has tended it records the same detail. The dust inside never settles. They do not speak of what they guard, but they do write, briefly, in annotations buried in medical treatises, in glosses scrawled at the edges of psalters, in the margins of obscure calendars. Not all vigils are kept with candles. Some are kept with breath. She remains beneath, not below us, beneath time. The seal is not to keep her in. It is to remind us not to forget. This is not metaphor, because in 1543, during a regional ecclesiastical census, an inquisitor visits the monastery. He stays one night. He leaves at dawn. His official report is 1 line. They guard silence older than the creed. He does not return. No penalties are issued. The census skips the monastery the following year, and every year after that. The monks do not resist church authority, because the church no longer looks. They do not seek converts. They do not offer mass. They exist at the edge of sanction, protected, perhaps, by usefulness. Feared, perhaps, because they do not speak. Feared, more, because they do not question. 1 letter, and signed, undated, tucked into the bindings of a Carmelite devotional, describes a visit to the cell by a traveling nun. She asks to see the sleeper. The monk opens a wooden door. Inside, a figure, barely visible. Still, the nun kneels and writes. Her eyes were open, but not to me. Her mouth was closed, but I heard my name. What were the monks guarding? Not her body, not her virtue, not even her stillness. They were guarding the threshold, the moment before knowledge speaks, the moment before power moves, the space between breath and voice. And as the centuries progress, the visits continue. Not often, not in numbers, but always the same. A woman arrives. No questions, no declarations. She enters the cell. She lies down. The monks record the year. And wait, the final record, dated 1792, the year the French Revolution reaches deep into the church, reads only. She has not returned breath, but neither has she lost it. We will not unseal the door. There is no further entry, but the cell remains, sealed, not forgotten. Because every year, on the night of the old solstice, the monks still write one line, always the same, on new parchment, in new ink, still, and they place it inside the sealed room. You begin to realize, the monasteries were not hiding sleepers from the world. They were hiding the world from the sleepers. Because to awaken in the presence of what we have built might be too terrible to bear. The official calendar reforms of Europe are clean, mathematical, precise. They speak of alignment, of error corrected, of lunar drift restored to order. But under that logic, something trembles. Because the days themselves were not the only things altered. Memory shifted. And in that shift, some did not follow. Some stayed behind, still, breathing, unawakened. October 1582. The night passes. You wake the next morning. It is no longer the 5th. It is the 15th. 10 days gone. Erased. Not lived. Not even grieved. You are told it is right. You are told it is needed. But in the silence beneath the bells, something doesn't fit. In the archives of St. Riquier, an abbey already crumbling by the mid-16th century, one account remains of a woman named Claire who had not spoken since the feast of St. Bridget. No year is given, but the detail matters. Because that feast, February 1st, was used by rural convents to chart internal seasons. Not just liturgical, biological. They called it the breath calendar. A way to measure the return of light through the sleep of women who no longer bled. The ones who withdrew. The ones whose skin cooled, but whose hearts remained faithful. Claire's breath returned on October 10th. The year was 1582, 5 days before the church erased 10. And what she said was this: "Where is the moon? She was full. She is missing." The sisters could not explain. They showed her the stars, the tides. She wept, not for confusion, but for betrayal. You begin to notice a pattern. The women who slept through calendar corrections, even when they awakened, did not return whole. Their prayers were out of season. Their hours were inverted. One wrote psalms backward. One turned toward Mecca, unknowing, during lauds. One refused to light candles, saying, "There is no dark anymore," only forgetting what was lost in those 10 days. The church insists, nothing. But the whispers among monastics say otherwise. That certain vigils failed to conclude. That saints' days collapsed. That feast cycles, ancient ones, older than Rome, no longer aligned with the stars. And the women who slept? They knew. Because their breath did not adjust. Their stillness remained tied to something the calendar could no longer reach. In the Cathedral of Basel, a letter remains, buried beneath the hymnals, tucked into the lining of an altarpiece. It is unsigned. It reads, "She has not moved since Michaelmas, but her bones hum with time that no longer matches the clocks." We do not know her name, only the date, October 1st, 1582. 9 days before time is rewritten. Time is not only a number. It is a body, a breath, a rhythm. And when that rhythm is broken, no matter how precise the mechanism, the flesh does not forget. A German midwife writes, in 1583, of a noble girl who fell into torpor on the night of Saint Ursula. She records, "The child does not bleed, does not stir, but she mutters the hours, wrong. Wrong how? Not wildly, not confused, just offset, as though she were following an older son." In a Jesuit record from Portugal, 1584, a theologian makes a troubling note. She does not respond to our Latin, but when we read the calendar from the year of her birth, she speaks, briefly, then slips back. Her sleep began in 1572, a leap year. Her awakening comes 12 years later, but only when they present her with the liturgical schedule from her girlhood, outdated, discredited, no longer valid. That is the moment she breathes again, only to say, "This is the right moon." Then silence. The church never attributes these cases to the calendar change. They are called isolated events. Hysteria, mystical imbalance. But internally, correspondence between certain bishops reveals concern. They begin to suspect a deeper link. That time was not neutral. That by correcting it, they had unmoored something. Not in the heavens, but in the body. You wonder what was buried in those missing 10 days. What dreams unfolded? What prayers were left unfinished? What vows remained suspended, unanswered, unbroken? Because if a woman enters sleep before the correction and wakes after, what covenant remains? With God? With man? With the self? In a monastic ruin in Avignon, the following inscription is carved faintly into the stone behind a collapsed apse. The world moved on. I did not. The moon returns to me, not them. No name, no date, just the sense of a breath held too long. And yet, there is something worse. Because in at least one case, a woman awakens and does not recognize the world. Not because it is strange, but because it is too precise. She says, I slept in the breathing dark. Now I am measured. Cut. She dies the next day. No illness. No trauma. Only fracture. The calendar holds. But something inside her has been edited. Too cleanly. Too deeply. Perhaps the calendar was not a correction. Perhaps it was an incision. And in its wake, those who slept were the only ones who still remembered the original shape of time. Not ordered. Not perfect. But breathing. Warm. And alive. Some bodies resist movement. Not from sickness. Not from choice. But from some interior withdrawal, slow, deliberate, unreachable. Medicine cannot explain it. Doctrine avoids it. But in the damp pages of pre-modern anatomy, a question echoes. What, exactly, is the difference between sleep and refusal? In a 1641 treatise kept beneath a cracked bell tower in Rouen, a physician named Aloy Marchand writes of a woman whose skin grew cold without decay. Her heart beat slowly, but steadily. Her breath shallowed, but never ceased. Her muscles were supple. Her eyes were closed, but not collapsed inward. She remained that way for 9 months, until the full moon of Lent. Then, one morning, she spoke. I am not ready to rejoin the body. She closed her eyes again, and did not speak again. Marchand titles his paper, Vita in statu interdictu, Life in a Forbidden State. He is denounced. His work disappears from public record, but copies survive in private archives, passed hand to hand, not as curiosity, but as warning. By the early 17th century, a few physicians begin documenting what they call anatomia tacita, the anatomy of silence. It is not a school, not a discipline, but a shared sense that something lives beyond their diagrams. Something warm, something still, something the church calls dangerous, because silence was never neutral, especially in a woman. Throughout the Counter-Reformation, stillness becomes conflated with heresy. Inquisition documents describe seditious immobility. They accuse women of withdrawing from time, of rejecting the sacrament of labor, of refusing the visible world. These are not metaphors. They are indictments. One woman in Naples is brought before the tribunal after being found in bed, unmoving, for 72 days. The priests demand confession. She offers nothing. They administer communion. She swallows, but does not speak. A physician is called. He reports. Pulse soft. Skin responsive. No sign of illness. No sign of madness. The trial ends without verdict. Her silence is not broken. What does it mean for a body to work, but not move? What does it mean to function without submitting? Some see it as failure. Others, as revolt. A scribe in Prague notes a troubling pattern in a convent's infirmary. 5 women, different cells, all unmoving, all silent, each with breath intact. When asked why they no longer speak, one blinks and traces a circle on the bedsheet. When asked what it means, she turns her face to the wall. They do not wake together. They do not share blood. They are not contagious. But the Mother Superior writes, stillness spreads. In 1655, a Jesuit anatomist sketches the lungs of a woman who had not moved in over a year. The sketch shows no damage, no rupture, but along the inner lining, he notes a subtle variation in texture, a thickening, a quieting. He writes, hesitantly, she breathes, but inward, not for speech, not for heat, but for memory. This is not science. It is disobedience. Because to describe stillness as an active state, not a failure, is to give it dignity. And to grant it dignity is to threaten power. And so, the diagnosis shifts. Stillness becomes hysteria. The body is no longer sacred, but flawed, mechanical, disordered, treatable. In 1682, a physician in London recommends the use of sound, bells, drums, clapping, to rouse women from resistant torpor. In 1691, Another prescribes fire cupping to draw the sleep outward. By 1700, bleeding becomes common, followed by isolation, followed by confinement. The cells grow smaller. The voice is quieter. The terms more clinical. But the bodies remain unmoved. Because something in them knows. Stillness is not weakness. It is sovereignty. What if the body, in stillness, is withholding? Not just labor, not just voice, but consent. To the rhythm, to the system, to the frame in which she is expected to live. This is the heresy the church cannot name. Not blasphemy, not apostasy, but retreat. A sacred secession from time itself. And the proof remains in fragments. In a sealed folder in the Vatican archives, mislabeled as De Morbis Obscuris, there is a transcription of an exorcism attempt conducted in 1713. The woman is unmoving, unafraid. The priest invokes each name of Christ. She does not stir. He cites the authority of Rome. Still, she breathes, but does not submit. At the end, the priest weeps, not from fear, but from recognition. He writes, "She is not held. She is holding." There is power in motion, but there is also power in its refusal. And for centuries, certain women claimed that power without word, without gesture, without rebellion. Only breath, only presence, only the quiet certainty of not moving in a world that demands it. The church called them heretics. Medicine called them disordered. But they remained silent, still. And if you listen carefully, beneath the rituals, beneath the chants, beneath the turning of the seasons, you can hear it. The hum of a body that refuses to disappear. The age of reason begins with a contradiction. They claim the soul cannot be measured, but they build instruments to find its edges. They say sleep is harmless, but they punish those who linger inside it. And as science rises, something else is buried. The ancient idea that sleep is not merely absence, but resistance. In a Paris laboratory in 1759, a physician named Gerard Vallant builds a machine meant to measure breath. He calls it the aerograph. It records the rhythm of lungs, not with ink, but with smoke. He places the device beside a woman who has not stirred in 94 days. The line it draws is steady, deliberate, beautiful. He calls it musique de l'ombre, music of the shadow. His peers call it fraud, but Vallant persists, because he begins to see a pattern. The breath is not random. It is recursive, mathematically structured, like a ritual. What if these women are not lost? What if they are inside something? A pattern, a chamber, a mechanism older than medicine. By the 1770s, studies of catalepsy and trance states begin to overlap with spiritual inquiry, but only for men. The magnetic sleep of Franz Mesmer is celebrated, a mystical science of energy and flow. When a man enters trance, he is called a visionary. When a woman does, she is called unstable. The contradiction grows sharp. Beneath it, the older question stirs again. Why do some women not return? In a convent hospital in Marseille, 1784, Sister Beatrix falls into sleep after a season of intense prayer. She does not wake for 227 days. Each morning, her pulse is taken. Each evening, her fingers are gently moved. She never decays. She never withers. She simply waits. When she finally opens her eyes, she whispers, "You were too loud." No one understands. But the other sisters grow silent around her. They begin to pray without sound. A physician from the Royal Academy arrives to observe. He writes, "The quiet was unbearable. Not absence, not peace, something else." He leaves after 3 days. He publishes nothing. Science does not know what to do with her, so it ignores her. And yet, inside the ledgers and field notes of traveling doctors, entries appear, always at the margins. Words like withdrawal, volitional torpor, still conscious dormancy. They never last. Each time the pattern emerges, it is erased. But then the machines return. Not Vallant's, those are lost, but newer ones. In 1802, a Prussian physician places a sensitive pendulum above a sleeping woman's chest. He expects irregularity. What he finds is precision. A rhythmic interval of 3.2 seconds. No variation. He repeats the experiment for 6 nights. Each time, the rhythm holds. He publishes under a pseudonym, A.W. His paper is titled, "On the Clock Inside the Sleeping Woman." It is dismissed as pseudoscience. But something in the data lingers. A rhythm beneath reason. A pulse that obeys no command and answers to no clock. but its own. And there is a deeper unease. Because the more they measure the sleeping body, the more they begin to suspect. It is not inert. It is not passive. It is not failing. It is working on something else. In 1811, an assistant surgeon aboard a ship to Malta documents a case. A noblewoman, traveling under religious asylum, falls into sleep after a storm at sea. She remains unconscious for the rest of the voyage, but her hands twitch at sunrise. Her lips part during the reading of psalms. Her pupils dilate when bells are rung in the distance. She is asleep, but aware. The surgeon writes. Her mind is tuned to a different frequency, a deeper code. He never sees her again. But in his notes, one sentence appears, written at the edge of the page. She knew when we lied. This is the true fear. That sleep is not ignorance. It is perception beyond reach. It is a mode of listening that cannot be coerced. In 1820, a physician in Milan attempts to induce waking with galvanic current. He applies the electrodes gently. The woman flinches once, then smiles, and says, "You can push the river, but it will not flow faster." She sleeps again. He calls it a psychotic episode, but he does not repeat the experiment. The questions pile. Why do these women not die? Why do they not atrophy? What is the body doing when it does nothing at all? You return to Valence aerograph, the one that traced breath with smoke. No copies remain. Only one drawing survives, etched in copperplate. A looping figure, delicate, perfect. It does not look like breath. It looks like a labyrinth, a path in, a path out, and always the center. What if the sleeping women are not gone? What if they are at the center? Not lost, not waiting, but remembering. Something the world no longer wants to know. In one of the final letters from Sister Beatrix, she writes, "There is a room in the soul with no door. I found it. I do not leave it now. The letter isn't signed, but the wax seal is intact. A circle. Inside it, a spiral. No crest, no cross. Only the shape of something older. Untranslatable. The machines continue to advance. The sciences grow sharper, but the silence endures. And somewhere, behind locked doors and hospital veils, the breath of the sleeping woman continues. Not random, not broken, but structured, reverent, and absolutely unclaimed. There is a moment in every investigation when the thread refuses to hold. You have the records, the names, the letters. You have the sketches of breath, the court transcripts, the sealed chapels, the missing dates. But the witnesses, those who saw with their own eyes, begin to vanish. Or worse, they begin to contradict. Not each other, themselves. A nun in 1834 writes to a bishop, "She slept for 13 winters. I tended her daily." 3 years later, asked to testify again, she says, "No such woman lived here." Her signature matches. Her face is the same, but her certainty has turned. It begins to happen more frequently. Midwives who swore on breath and pulse later claim confusion. Monks who documented decades of vigil now say the beds were always empty. In courtrooms, in confessions, in final letters, the tone is the same. A strange, urgent need to forget. But forget what? And why? There are theories. Whispers among archivists, whispered even more softly among historians of the forbidden. That some knowledge cannot be preserved without distortion. That certain memories rot, unless actively suppressed. In 1842, a French philosopher writes a treatise titled Silence as a load-bearing structure. It is dismissed as metaphor. But in the final chapter, he writes, "Witness collapses where contradiction is absolute. To see the sleeping woman and live with what she reveals is to become structurally unsound." He dies 1 month after publication. His house is burned. The last copy of the manuscript is found in a box of children's hymnals. What does it mean to see something the world cannot afford to acknowledge? What happens to the mind that holds a truth with no place to land? In Vienna, a young doctor named Therese Kahn is assigned to care for a patient diagnosed with recumbent hysteria. The woman has not moved in 8 years. Kahn begins with skepticism, but after several weeks, she stops documenting. Instead, she visits the woman nightly. She begins speaking to her, not clinically, but like to an old friend. She reports dreams that align with the woman's breathing. She writes, "I see her behind the eyes. I see what she remembers." Her final entry, "There is no place to put this. Not in reason, not in prayer, not in time." She vanishes the next day. Her room is empty. Her name is struck from hospital records. This is the collapse, not of belief, but of capacity. The mind can hold contradictions, but it cannot hold contradictions deliberately denied. In psychology, this becomes a shadow, not spoken aloud, but felt. The unnameable thing behind certain breakdowns. A pressure, a hum, a presence beneath forgetting. You begin to understand. The system needs the witness to fracture. Because the sleeper is too consistent, too present. She does not die. She does not rise. She simply remains. And in her remaining, she dismantles the idea that the world moves forward in neat, logical steps. Because she does not. In 1851, a government census official records the presence of a woman in a rural hospice who has not risen from bed since the year of Waterloo. He describes her precisely. Black hair, pale skin, eyes closed, warm. He returns the following year. No one has heard of her. The room is sealed. The hospice insists no such patient was ever recorded. He presents his paperwork. They return it, blank. The building burns 2 months later. No cause is determined. If this were once, it could be chance. But it is not once. It is again, and again, and again, as if something in the world itself has decided. She may remain, but no one must remember. And yet, the fragments survive. The drawing etched into a table beneath a chapel. The hand-stitched name on a pillow no one claims. The song, hummed by children in a dialect no longer spoken, that ends with, "She waits where the clocks are quiet." Even now, this happens. You mention her. Someone nods. They know. They've heard. They remember a story, vague, uncertain, about a girl who slept for decades, whose body did not change, whose skin did not age. But when you ask for more, the eyes go distant. The details fade. And they say, "I must have dreamt it." But what if the forgetting is not failure? What if it is design? Not just by institutions, but by reality itself. Because if we truly saw her, unbroken, unchanged, untouched by time, what would that make of us? Of our movements? Of our beliefs? Of our certainty that to act is to live? She does not ask for worship. She does not need testimony. But to look at her, and keep looking, is to risk unraveling everything the waking world requires. So the witnesses collapse, and the archives bend, and the memory breaks, not by violence, but by design. A system too fragile to hold what it has excluded. She remains, and the silence around her thickens, because the last truth is the one that cannot be written. She does not sleep through time. She sleeps beneath it, and it is time, not we, that must forget her. At the end of a narrow corridor beneath a defunct asylum in eastern Bohemia, there is a door. It is made of iron, unlabeled, but the hinges are polished, despite the rust that eats the floor around it. Inside, a room with no windows, no altar, no cot, only stone, and a chair, facing the center, where a shallow indentation marks the place where something or someone lay. For how long? No one knows. Because the files are empty, the folders are clean, but the dust is disturbed, as though someone has been here. Recently, in 1868, the asylum received a patient known only as Specimen 12F. She arrived with no paperwork, no known origin, no language. She did not speak. She did not move. But her eyes were open. The staff rotated in shifts to observe her. They were told to take notes. Every hour, every day, the records begin clinically. Pulse, 57 BPM. Temperature, normal. Response to light, none. But soon, the entries shift. One doctor writes, "She does not move, yet I feel watched." Another notes, "The air changes when I enter. My thoughts cloud. I forget what I meant to write." After 3 months, a new directive is issued. No names, no touch, no sound. She is to be observed only, without inference, without interaction, only measurement. But measurement fails, because the machines begin to break. Thermometers crack in the drawer before use. Watches run fast inside the room, then stop entirely once removed. One nurse reports, "I wrote the date wrong every day she was here, even when I checked twice." What can be recorded if time itself slips? What is left when observation erodes? The vault becomes an error, a wound in the system. So they erase. The ledgers are cleared, the logs rewritten, the staff reassigned, the room sealed, but the imprint remains. And not just in stone, in memory, in the soft wrongness that coats the air when you say her name. If you ever knew it. She is not alone, because in at least 4 other institutions across Europe, one in the Scottish Highlands, one in the Carpathians, one in northern Iberia, one beneath a dissolved Cistercian cloister in Champagne, similar rooms appear in records. Always unnamed, always excluded from official architecture, always temporary, yet never removed. The figures who lay within them are never acknowledged. They are listed as unresponsive subjects. They are measured without understanding, fed without response, and eventually, inevitably, forgotten, not buried, not mourned, just written over. This is the vault, not a place, a pattern, a space made to contain the thing we cannot hold, not because it harms us, but because it undoes us. And yet, a few who entered these rooms kept journals. Illicit, smuggled, unfinished. Fragments. One writes, "She is not asleep. She is beyond exhaustion. She rests where memory has no shape." Another, "Her silence makes my skin ache. Not from fear, from recognition." Another, final entry, "If I sit too long in the room, I forget my name. And when I leave, I remember hers. But not the shape of it." To lose your name is no small thing. It is not forgetting. It is replacement. Because the vaults are not empty. They are full of breath, of waiting, of memory that does not wear names, because names can be burned. But breath endures. In one archive, barely legible, a note is found scrawled on the inside cover of an unbound ledger. When they came to seal her room, the candle went out. And yet, the wax was warm. I did not relight it. I left. I do not know who I am. Perhaps you think this is metaphor, a mind unraveling, an old nurse's madness. But look closely, because the handwriting on the next page is different, as though someone else picked up the pen, but signed the same name. The vault is not to keep her in. It is to keep us from becoming her. Because to sit in that silence too long is to remember what the world made you forget. That there is another way to exist. Without urgency, without performance, without obedience to clocks and calendars and witness. Only breath, only stillness, only the terrible, enduring presence of the unnamed. And once you feel it, once you truly see her, in that lightless space, unowned, unwritten, awake beneath the veil of sleep, you cannot unsee. You cannot leave unchanged. Because the vault may be sealed, but its shape lives in you now, and you will begin to feel it. Every time you sit still long enough. Every time the world grows too loud. Every time you find yourself forgetting the day. Not a failure, not a lapse, just a pressure, a hum, and beneath it, the memory of a room with no name. That waits. There is no final record, no last breath, no definitive waking. The story does not end, because it was never permitted to begin. Each archive folds in on itself. Each account trails off. Each name, if it survives at all, is misfiled, redacted, or rewritten. And yet, the pattern remains. Not in the books, not in the doctrine, but in the dark space between them. Where time does not flow, it pools. Where stillness is not absence, it waits. In a monastery recently excavated near Trento, a sealed chamber is found. Behind plaster and stone, no door, no hinges, only a carved phrase, traced into the wood of a forgotten beam. She did not leave. She did not fade. We turned away. Inside, a recess in the floor, shaped like a body. No bones, only dust. Fine, pale, undisturbed. The historian who uncovers it leaves the field within the month. She writes no report, but she does send a letter, private, fragmented. It ends with one line. "I dreamed of her breath, and woke without mine." This is what time cannot hold. Not just the body, but the refusal, the resistance, the choice to remain motionless in a world that demands performance. Because the clock measures motion, but not meaning. She is never declared a saint, never canonized, never spoken of in liturgy. Yet her shape is burned into the architecture, into the way we divide days, weigh worth, measure use. Because she is the one who did not rise, who was not healed, who needed no miracle, only space, only time, only breath, a breath the world could not own. So it erased the one who took it. Even now, the traces remain. A handprint beneath a forgotten fresco, a line of him written in reverse in the margin of a ledger, a bed in a sealed convent, still made, untouched for centuries, yet remade every morning by silent hands. No one says why, but they continue. If you stand still long enough, in the ruins of that convent, you'll hear it. Not a voice, not a sound. A tension, a pressure against your ribs, as though something waits to be remembered. Something you never agreed to forget. Because it was never about sleep. It was never about illness. It was about the breath that could not be claimed. The time that would not be surrendered. The silence that outlasted every system built to contain it. You are not meant to understand. You are meant to return to the world, to the movement, to the noise, to the sanctioned rhythms of hours and work and purpose. But somewhere deep, beneath the hum of clocks, beneath the pageantry of motion, she is still there. Not sleeping, not hiding, just being, in a way we were taught to unlearn. Some truths cannot be recorded, only remembered, faintly, through walls, through dust, through a dream you do not recognize until years later, when the candle flickers without cause, and the silence hums, not with absence, but with weight. This is not her ending. There is no ending, only the breath that continues. Unwritten, unforgotten, unclaimed. She is not here, not in this script, not in the light of your screen, not even in the archives that tried, again and again, to forget her. But the silence she shaped, it lingers, in the folds of time, in the rooms without clocks, in the corners of language that never found a name for what she became. She did not resist. She did not fight. She simply remained, in breath, in refusal, in the slow, steady hum of a body that no longer answered to the world. And if you listened closely, if you truly listened, you felt it. Not drama, not fear, but a disquiet so deep, so old, it could only speak through absence, through stillness, through sleep that was not sleep at all, just memory, unwound from the timeline that tried to cut it. So now, as the final words settle into silence, you may feel the pressure of something unsaid, a name you do not know, but will not forget, a shape behind the veil of forgetting, not gone, not lost, only quiet, waiting. If you believe this story is worth continuing, tap subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Have a good night. Sweet dreams.